So there's many things I could talk about. The best place to start with this one is I started working on this album at a very strange time in my life. My dad began to get sick, and his health started to go downhill. Eventually, he ended up passing away, um, and that was when I first started working on these songs. And then, fast forward a little bit, my wife got into a car accident and almost died. Fast forward a little further, we had a little bit of a health scare with my wife. Thank God everything was okay there. Um, and then fast forward a little bit more, Christmas Eve 2018, our house ended up burning down and we lost everything we own. So the recordings for this album were on my computer, and I was able to grab my computer and a handful of guitars, and that's it. So we didn't have a house for probably the better part of I'd say 9 months, and we finally got a place, and here it is, December. The date right now is December 19th, 2019, and I'm waiting to get the master copies back of the album, and I'm recording this commentary. So it's a year later from our house fire. It's a few years since my dad passed. So this album has taken me a few years to put together and finish. It's been challenging to say the least, and my wife and I have had many emotional battles throughout this whole album, and I feel like you can hear those battles within the songs. So just a little further background: we moved to this new house, and when my dad passed, we all got wind chimes, and they said in memory of Bob Stirling. We lost ours in our house fire. We lost our wind chimes. So we had a family member that was moving, and for one reason or another, weren't able to take the wind chimes with them. So we got those wind chimes. So I hung the wind chimes on our front porch. And as we're in this new house and I'm finishing the album, I'm tracking parts. The room where I'm recording is at the front of the house. I'm going back and I'm listening to these recordings. I'm like, what the hell? I'm hearing wind chimes in the back. And I'm like, crap, because it's on a lot of recordings. I was kind of confused and at a loss. I didn't know what I was going to do. After waking up the next morning, I realized I was like, those wind chimes belong in the album. It's almost like my dad's a part of the album. Like he was with me while I was recording it. So I decided to leave the chimes in the album, and I even added more chimes throughout the album. So I took the chimes off the front porch and I hung them in the middle of the room, and I put mics all around them. I would just kind of push them and let them ring out. I put those throughout the album, so when you hear those wind chimes, at least when I hear those wind chimes, it's like my dad's got to be a part of my album with me. My whole intention with this album was I wanted it to not stop from beginning to end, and I wanted it to almost put people in almost like a trance. When people are listening to the album, I really wanted them to, as they got deeper and deeper into the songs, I wanted them to basically get lost. My prayer is that they kind of find a peace somewhere within the songs. Behind the Veil, really kind of, when I listened to it, it really was just pretty obvious to me that it needed to be the first song on the album. Just how it starts off, it seemed like it was really a good way that the album needed to start. So that's why it jumped up in front. Channeling the Spirit was the next song, And I I worked and worked and worked on the rhythm parts. It took quite a while to try to get those to get something unique that would fit the song. The banjo rhythms are really kind of an odd rhythm. It's kind of hidden within the song. There's other things over it to match up some kind of percussion with the rhythm of the banjo was pretty challenging. But when I got that drum part that starts into the song down, I was like, "This is it." Strength of my hands. I've had this song for a long time, so I finally recorded it. This is the third version of the song. The other two were okay, but this one really resonated with me. It seemed to really make sense for the album. A lot of these songs are pretty repetitive, but I wanted, and that's usually something I'm not terribly fond of within music. But with this album and trying to kind of hope that people would get lost, in the album and almost kind of a, meditative trance like state, repetition is helpful to push towards that goal. So you can hear that I have an old violin bow of my wife's. I use that pretty heavily in this song where I'm bowing that banjo and did it in a couple different keys and harmonized with the bow. And I really, really like how it came out. War Drums is a song that is a little. There's a couple songs on this album that I would say, in a traditional kind of mixing, audio mixing sense, is a little muddier, muddy with the mix. But most nights, every night, I go to sleep and I listen to recordings of what I'm working on at the time. And as I was listening to War Drums, there was something about it after listening to it, the low end, almost kind of muddiness in the mix. I felt like I got lost in the song, and I feel like it was partially due to that. So I tried to reproduce that with a couple of the other songs on the album, with Golgotha and From the Dirt. I tried to copy that. Day Coming is it's one I've always just had rolling around in my little bag of songs. I felt like it really complemented the album. The whole personality of the song is very different from all the other songs on the album. I wanted to keep the song simple. I actually had added a lot of things to that song originally, and sometimes I'll go into my recordings and I'll just mute all the tracks except for the core things like the vocals and guitar, or just vocals and banjo. I really liked how it sounded, pretty cut down, very minimal, not a lot of instrumentation added. I tried all kinds of things, adding things to it. Everything just seemed to kind of take away from it. So I left Day Coming pretty simple, and I felt like it just really, it was a good addition to all these other songs. Indiana, it is the only song on the album that has electric guitar. And not just that, electric guitar is the primary instrument on the whole song. Completely different than all the songs on the album, but somehow it just kind of fit with the songs. I can't really explain why, but there's something about it, and it being kind of tucked in between Day Coming and then the transitions in between the song, and then it goes into the Blessing Hand. Just something about, yeah. And I'm kind of struggling even of how to explain why I think it fit well on the album. Um, and maybe to some people it doesn't fit well. Um, and that's okay too, I guess. But at the end of the day, um, I get to pick the songs, so I was I was happy with it. It ended up on the album. The Blessing Hand. I hesitated with this song and how I put it together. So there's Coptic monks singing in the background. I hesitated on putting that with the song because I didn't want it to be distracting. I just sat down and played my banjo, hit record, and sang. I really wanted to make a simple song like banjo and vocals unique. So as I was thinking about how to do that, I was listening to this recording of these Coptic monks singing. It's something I go to sometimes very often, like every day or every other day. Sometimes every 2 weeks or so, I'll listen to certain recordings and like sacred chants or uh, like these Coptic monks, this recording that's in this song. I just thought it'd be a really neat thing to put that in the album, share that with people. It's something that's pretty sacred to me. My spirit gets really filled when I listen to the recording of them singing. It brings me a lot of peace. And so I thought it'd be a really neat thing if I could put that on the album. Hopefully other people would get the same feeling I get from it when they listen to With the Wolves. So this is really probably my favorite song on the album. I just felt like With the Wolves needed to be towards the bottom, It needed to kind of anchor the back end of the album. The whole vibe of it going from Day Coming, which is very chill, Indiana, which has, kind of a melancholy feel to it. It gets loud, and then it goes into Blessing Hand, and there's a dip kind of in the energy of the album and a real somber feel. And then it comes back up. With the Wolves just kind of jumps out. It wakes you up, and it kind of carries you through to the rest of the album. So I feel like it's kind of preparing you for the end of the album. Polly's violin is just great on it. We did multiple takes, and it just worked out great because I went and it got very different vibes with all her runs. I couldn't be happier with how it came out. So From the Dirt, it's the mix is muddy to me, and the song is repetitive, but that works for this album. So if I'm looking at the album with my thinking and my whole processing of where to put these songs, the Blessing Hand is very mellow in energy, and then With the Wolves kind of wakes you up, brings you back to paying attention, I guess, and it's kind of saying the end of the album's coming. From the Dirt, I feel like kind of carries that, but almost kind of brings you back into that trance-like state. So the muddiness, as far as the mix, the muddier mix, and the repetitive. And then you have Golgotha, which is the end of the album. From the Dirt, I feel like really sets up to end on Golgotha. They're both vibe-wise to me, they're very similar. They have a similar feel to them. They both are repetitive, and as far as mix wise, they're both kind of muddy. For whatever reason, I felt like they needed to be together. They needed to end the album. So the album ends, and then it trails off. There's chimes that you hear at the beginning of the album, and then they carry through the ending of the album, and then a quote from a monk at the end. I feel like really wraps up, for one, the whole album, but on a personal level, this journey my wife and I have been on for the last handful of years. We've had so much heartache and heartbreak and disappointment and struggle, but we're happier than we've ever been, and we're happy with not a whole lot of stuff. We have each other, we have our family, and we have our faith. So that end quote really wraps up, I feel like, the album and the journey we've been on the last handful of years, to where I'm more interested to see what kind of man I can become internally. This external life is just a shadow, and it's just smoke in the breeze. So, if you're listening to me right now, I guess the message I want to convey to you is that I hope you have a peaceful, beautiful life. I hope you're fulfilled and you're happy. I hope that you know your worth, and and that you don't doubt that. Um, and I would challenge you to try to master being present every second of every day. Be present where you're at. Be thankful for what you have. I hope that you find some kind of beauty and peace in these songs. And if not these songs, maybe some of my other songs on other albums, or maybe another musician. Or maybe you just walk outside and you see how beautiful life can be